We all have a creative part of our brain, whether we use it or not, for generating new ideas, problem solving, and just viewing ourselves in this world. I am Ricky McGuckran, an artist living in Chicago, and I am eager to know and share with you all how people of a creative leaning have brought this way of thinking to the forefront and how it has shifted outcomes. Life is a continual series of choices. Every day, we are presented with options of what to do with our bodies, our voices, and most importantly, our thoughts and beliefs. These daily choices all add up and create the results in our lives, the projects we work on, the goals we achieve, and the people we connect with. I always find it inspiring when someone's choices transform a not-so-great life experience into something positive and helpful to our world. Frederick and I first met at an art gallery in Chicago. Both of us were presenting our art for critique from other artists. It was a unique way to initially meet someone, as an intimate part of us, our creative expression, is the first thing we are seeing of each other. I found Frederick's artwork extremely interesting and thoughtful, and as I got to know him personally, I was impressed by his story. He started his creative journey with writing, but this was derailed by some serious mental health issues. He was not able to keep things moving with writing, but he found visual arts, specifically painting, was a beneficial escape for him. The great part about Frederick's story is how he has taken his life experiences and making choices that enable him to use them in a positive, helpful way. I am excited to share my conversation with artist Frederick Nitsch. When you started painting at the age of 20, was that the first time you had done stuff creative? Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with creative expression up until 20?
So by that time, I had never felt like I had any aptitude for visual art. I always knew that I, couldn't draw, and I felt because of that, visual art was sort of off limits for me.
Okay.
But I was a writer. I was studying philosophy in college, and but I was super involved with the literary scene at my college. I led writing critique groups, and I was the MC of a lot of the open mic nights at the local coffee shop.
And at open mic night, people would be reading what they wrote. I assume. So
reading,
poetry or short story or something.
Right. So
Okay.
so that was sort of my thing.
So writing was your thing.
Yeah, and that's really what I expected to be doing with my life, was writing. But then when I was writing my senior thesis, I was getting pretty lost in that. I was going through a breakup, and a friend was just like, you need a nonverbal outlet. So I was getting pretty lost in my thoughts and lost in my thesis, and she just gave me a set of paints, and I was like, what do I do with these? I can't draw, you know that. And she was like, just move the colors around, just do something with them. And I did, and I liked it. At first I was trying to do, I love Bob Ross growing up. So I was trying to do trees and little houses, and they did look awful. But something started happening in the non-figurative areas, in the sky and the ground. Something when the colors were blurring, something was happening that I liked. So I pretty soon quit attempting to do anything figurative, and I just focused on figuring out what exactly was happening when those colors were blurring in that way that I liked, and how could I replicate that. And I basically spent the next 10 years trying to figure out exactly how that worked.
Meaning how
to make the colors blur in that particular way that I liked so much, which ended up becoming a tool that I could then use intentionally to create these sort of vague, ghostly, organic shapes with very ill-defined edges.
This sounds very interesting. This journey in visual art, can you map that to a similar journey in writing? Because I'm not a writer, so I'm not really familiar with like how that works in your brain and what the creative process is. Is there a mapping? Are they just completely separate?
Well, so if you're asking about just like to draw an analogy to writing, I'm not sure I can. I mean, perhaps it would be something like, you know, figuring out how to like, I don't know, trying to master like the sonnet or something, but an analogy is difficult because so I was beginning to get really into painting as I was having real difficulties with academia and with writing.
And were those difficulties because of something having to do with the writing process, or was there other things that are happening?
Yeah, so it's sort of like so the other story going on, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I finished college. I got some job in a call center that I hated. Um, and I was just like, hey, I was good at school. So,
So you had finished college at this point?
yeah.
Okay.
And I was like, I was good at school. Maybe I'll just try to do more school. So I started applying to like PhD programs. Um, and so I got into Loyola out here in Chicago for like a combined MA PhD in philosophy, kind of thinking naively that that would be like more college and they give you a stipend to teach. So I came out here and it was not that, right? It's a very different thing. They're training you to be a professor and you're doing research for a dissertation. And I became terribly, terribly depressed. So at that point, like I wasn't doing creative writing at all. I was just doing academic writing. And
So it was not what you expected, not what you planned, and it just
right.
put you in a depressed state, and you
Yeah.
were unable to to do the work.
Yeah. And so writing at that time became very like inextricably tied with anxiety. And I've recently started writing again a little bit, but like during my time in grad school and then until I quit after 4 years of that program. Um, I was just like unable to write at all.
So when you are in a difficult place personally,
Mhm.
it sounds like it's difficult for you to write. Is that
Yeah,
accurate? Is it easy for you to paint?
yeah, yeah. Painting was my escape. Painting was my uh, refuge. It was my therapy. Um, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, absolutely.
that's so interesting. Uh, that is not the case for me. Like
Mm,
painting for me is not. I have to be in a good mental state.
mm,
It's kind of like it sounds like writing is for you. I have to be in a really good place to paint, and I have to be fit, healthy, eating well, well rested, etc. in order for me to paint. Or else I can't. Like I think I told you today when we were outside. Like I went to the studio for 2 hours and I had to leave. I just couldn't do it today, and it really bummed me out because I'm working on something I'm super excited about, but my mood is just really low today. And so I couldn't do it. But I was speaking to my sister this weekend, and she's an avid reader. And I asked her about when you're like really in a low place, are you able to like read and process words? Because I can't do that either. Like reading is kind of like painting. And she said, yeah. She said it's like
mm,
her escape, kind of like painting is for you. For me, it's cooking.
mm,
Like I can be in the
mm.
worst mood ever, and I can just go in the kitchen and start a big cooking project, and I feel great, and I don't have to. I don't know. I don't need to be in a good mood to do it. So it's just interesting that
Yeah.
everyone is so different in the way that different outputs you are able to do. Some of them you can't do, depending on your mood, and others are something that you can do to improve your mood.
So the sort of simultaneous story going on with me in graduate school, me like stopping writing, me taking up painting as an escape, and then maintaining painting as this hobby that sort of sustained me. So that like the simultaneous story was, I mean, I I left graduate school because I was hospitalized for depression. And the following like 6 years were extremely rough. I would be hospitalized 2 more times. So, specifically of writing, I feel like it was difficult for me because, you know, I think common depressive symptoms like negative self talk, right? Overthinking things like that was that came out on the page.
Hmm.
And just this purely visual thing. And what I explained before, like trying to figure out this sort of blurry thing, right? It became this very focused experiment for me. I was only using the primary colors in white for most of the time. I was only using one sort of brush, one sort of painting surface. It was a very focused experiment, and something about how focused that was um, allowed painting, abstract painting, to be this escape from thinking that like I couldn't experience like with the majority of my time.
That makes complete sense to me. Had you ever found anything else that did the same thing that allowed you to um, rechannel, refocus your thinking in your mind in a way in the past? Or was this the first time you discovered something like that?
I think that was really the first big thing that ever did that for me. Um, I think I had glimpses of that perhaps when I was going through some rough periods in college and I did like comedy a little bit, but it was just I just sort of dipped my toe in comedy. But that's why like 4 years ago, like after the last time I was hospitalized, I signed up for an improv class, which seemed ridiculous at the time given how depressed I still was.
Ridiculous to you or
Ridiculous to
or
me.
to others?
No, I didn't. I mean, other people didn't know at the time. I
Okay.
wasn't so open about these things, but like to me, it was like I haven't, laughed in 5 years. Like I'm signing up for improv. Wow,
Did it work?
it worked. I loved it. And I'm still doing it. It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I feel like improv, like doing improv, is like the opposite of social anxiety. Like if social anxiety is what causes you to not say anything in a group because you're thinking, what if it's stupid? What if
Hmm.
it's bad and wrong? Improv is just like built on the belief that what you say is fine,
But
and not only fine that, but other people will say, "Oh, I'll take this and I'll do something with it."
so what would improv do that would help you with social anxiety?
I remember for really all of my life, I remember if I was out with, I mean, on like, obviously on a date, but also like with a group of friends who I knew well, I remember like I would have an idea for like maybe I don't know, a funny comment or something, right? But I remember I would like think like, should I say this? Right. And then you wait so long the moment passes. And then you
Hmm.
kick yourself for not saying it.
Okay.
This whole snowball. I honestly don't have those moments really
So
anymore.
now you just say it.
Yeah, you kind of learn to trust yourself that like what you're like what you're thinking, what you want to say and contribute is fine, and maybe even good.
Okay.
Yeah, it just sort of has helped. It helped in conjunction with other things to like reorient the way that I engage with myself and the world.
It sounds like you went through clearly a very depressed period
Mm.
and you took some specific action that pulled you out of it. Therapy, engaging with creativity in the form of painting, and also improv.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, I know that you are involved in talking a couple things involved in taking this knowledge that you have learned and trying to help others. Is that a clear description?
yeah,
Can you
yeah.
tell me about that? What you're doing
Sure.
now?
Yeah. So, for a long time when I was really sick, I wasn't working. Like I was so sick, I was not able to. I would try getting jobs and then panic attacks, then quit. So I was really not employed. And then after this last time in the hospital, like big med changes were made and a lot of things changed for me. And then I felt after a couple of months there, I got a job bussing tables and sort of working my way up back into, I think what I'd always felt was expected of me, which was like sort of a traditional job.
Sure.
So for me, that ended up looking like a year with a company that did like in-school tutoring at a high school. Um,
And you were a tutor?
yeah, I was a math tutor.
Oh,
Oddly so, because I don't love math, but that was what the job was.
sounds like fun.
And I'd been a teacher in different capacities before, so it was like, cool.
What topics in math did you teach?
It was basic. It was like algebra and geometry. It was like 9th and 10th grade math.
Okay.
So I was able to do it. But yeah, so I guess a few things happened. But so this was the year that Trump was elected,
Mm-hmm.
and I was teaching in a school that had a lot of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and after Trump was elected, and I was working like 1-on-2, 1-on-3 with these kids. A number of my students, who were not born here, started getting really, really depressed and scared that they were going to be deported. And I mean, one of them said that, confided in me that she had started thinking about suicide. I mean, it was a lot, and between those, I didn't want to be talking about math anymore. I wanted to be talking about what they were going through and mental health. This made me think back to what if I had gotten better mental health education when I was their age. All this stuff. So I don't know. I feel like I had sort of by default made a decision like, okay, I'm better now. I'm gonna leave all this hard, heavy stuff in my past, and that suddenly didn't feel like the path I wanted to take
Mm-hmm.
anymore. So when that job ended, um, I got a job walking dogs, and I started looking for any organization in Chicago that did like mental health education for high schoolers. And that search did not take very long because I found NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they have a program called Ending the Silence, um, where people who are in recovery, living with a mental health condition, can go into high schools with them and tell their story. So I got in touch, and I did that um, a couple times, and I really liked doing it.
And
Um,
you would talk to what, a classroom
we
or
taught
or an auditorium?
sometimes an auditorium, but typically a classroom, like either health or gym. And I liked doing that. Like it felt really good to be doing that, and like
And it was a topic of your presentation. Like you decided what you were going to talk about.
well, so there was like a main presentation, which is what I'm doing now, which I'll get back to, where somebody would talk about general things like signs and symptoms of not specific mental health conditions. We don't want kids diagnosing themselves, but like signs and symptoms that it might be time to talk to somebody, how to talk about suicide, how to destigmatize mental illness generally, for most of the period. And then someone like me would talk for about 10 minutes about like just my like your life story,
Mm-hmm.
and take questions. NAMI thinks it's really important, as do I, that it's important not just to give the facts, but also that kids like meet and hear from people in
Sure.
recovery, hear the
Yeah.
story. So I did that.
So you use the term that you're in recovery from
Yeah.
mental. I don't think I've heard of someone using. I mean, obviously, I've heard of people use that term when it talks about substance abuse,
Mhm.
but I've never heard of
Mm,
it with specifically around mental illness.
sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
No. I mean, it's funny. It's funny to hear you say that because that's something I hear all the time.
What I just
In
said.
no, what I'm saying,
Oh yeah.
like being in recovery is sort of like that's like the term. Yeah. And I mean, I think a way to explain it is, um, I'm not gonna. I don't feel like I'm recovered,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I'm. Another way to put it would be like I'm in the maintenance phase,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Makes total sense.
Yeah,
Makes total
yeah,
sense to me.
yeah. Um,
No, I do think that when I was in high school in the 80s, there was very little talk of, um, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, none of these things were ever talked about. I see it all the time, like it's young celebrities. I don't even know how I have insight to what young celebrities are doing, but it somehow makes it into my brain. But yeah, they're always talking about things that they're struggling
Yeah.
with, and it seems like it is very much talked about. I would be surprised that kids in high school would not be aware of mental illness, the fact that it shouldn't be stigmatized. Is that not the case, or?
Yeah, it's no, I mean, I think people are talking about it more, but no, I mean it's yeah, no, we have a long way to go. I mean sometimes different presenters will, ask if so they'll ask if people know somebody living with a mental health condition, and sometimes some hands go up, but like not all of them or not many. Um, and that does depend on where the school is and what the demographic is, what the home culture is. And I can say that with, my father is he was a refugee when he was a kid, and he's not American. And so I understand it when someone's home culture is not one where you talk about your feelings. So yeah, we have more celebrities talking about mental health conditions, but that doesn't, I think people in our generation, I think we're seeing it more in the news, and more on our social media feeds, but I do not think that's sort of suddenly translated into our kids feeling comfortable talking about these things.
Okay.
Um,
No, I can assume that when you were younger, you were experiencing things related symptoms or depression. First of all, is that
yeah,
accurate? Okay.
yeah.
Now, what do you think would have been different if you had someone like you coming to your high school and talking about symptoms, things to look out for, etc.?
Um, yeah, I mean, so just one example. So I remember very specifically the reason I didn't talk to anybody my own age, in particular my brother, who's 2 years older, was because I felt very sure that all of my like intrusive thoughts and depressed thoughts were contagious. Like if I told them to somebody else, that they would start having them too, right? And that's obviously not
Meaning
how.
you would be bringing them down,
Right,
or was
like
it an irrational, like an irrational thought about transferring the
let
contents of your brain type thing?
well, I mean, so of like it was sort of like I've had all these what I thought then were sort of like obvious insights about, you know, sort of people are insignificant and there's death everywhere. But if I shared them with somebody who wasn't already thinking about them, that they would of course start thinking about them,
I see.
me having explained them, right?
So you'd be pointing out something that they were
Right,
ignorant of, and you would
right.
be making them aware of it, and you would be responsible
Ex-
for making
ex-
them aware of this reality that you had. Okay.
exactly. And so I didn't use the word depression about myself for like 10 more years after that. So I didn't know that the kinds of thoughts I was having, the fact that they were intrusive, the fact that they were so quick in my head, I didn't know that that had anything to do with brain chemistry, with depression, with anything like that. So I was just very misinformed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody had come to talk to a class of kids that I was in and had said anything about some sort of warning sign or some sort of symptom of depression that had resonated with me, and it would have resonated with me, I might have felt like, wow, this isn't just me. I can talk to people about this, and I'm not going to like spread these negative thoughts around, which was very much my concern.
That they are in fact just thoughts.
Exactly.
They're not reality.
Exactly. I did actually once talk to um, an adult in the school about it. The guidance counselor called me in when I was in eighth grade because my grades, which had always been really great, were suddenly slipping a lot. And I did actually try explaining all of these things I was thinking. And I was told, like, maybe you should play more sports.
Mm.
And I remember thinking at the time that he was really stupid and didn't
Mm.
understand me. But now And this is something that I share when I speak about these things. Um, when I speak with the police or speak with the fire at the fire academy, speak with adults, is that I think it just scared this adult to realize that a 13-year-old was thinking about such dark and complicated things.
Mm-hmm.
So when we at NAMI talk to different parts of our community, it's so that we engender a community where kids know, like among themselves, they're educated, but also they know that when they do try talking to an adult, that adult will take them seriously.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
So it sounds like you have this situation where you're dealing with children, high school kids,
yeah,
and kind of who may or may not be in a mental health situation,
yeah,
crisis, but just kind of informing them about the landscape,
yeah,
etc. You also do something around police departments
yeah,
and helping them to understand mental illness.
yeah.
Now that would be different because they would be the intersection of mental illness with them would be in a crisis
Right,
situation
right.
because so tell me a little bit about that work
Sure.
that you do.
Yeah. So I had done those like school talks as like the talking about my life presentation a couple times, and then my boss found out that I do improv, and she asked me if I'd like to sort of apply an interview for um, doing role plays with the crisis intervention team training, the CIT training that NAMI helps facilitate with the police academy. Um, so I've been doing that now for about 2 years, and I love it. I think it's vital to people's safety. Um, you know, so just what it is.
Yeah, what exactly
Yeah,
are you? So when those police officers leave, spending a day or however long it is with you, what is it that they know that they didn't know?
sure. So the police officers, and it's sergeants to two. It's detectives. Sometimes we have people from SWAT. Or we've had a few FBI people in there. It's a full week, 40-hour training, and they are hearing the entire week from different specialists. Um, and then on Thursday, um, I and 4 or 5 other people from NAMI um, will do role play simulations of various mental health crises. So we will be in a room, and this is all videotaped because we'll watch it all together on Friday and talk about it. Officers, typically in groups of 3, um, will have, you know, what would have been a 911 call um, information come into the room, and their job is to then use what they've gleaned from that week in terms of how to express empathy, validating statements, tone of voice, etc., but also how to assess non-judgmentally for the proper information that they might need for an involuntary hospitalization petition, and try to get us, right, the people in crisis, to agree to go to the hospital. And we are some of the scenarios that I do, because I'm also at the fire academy, are not things that are based on personal experiences, sometimes based off experiences of people I've known.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, the things that we are all enacting have to do with something we have experienced. And there is CIT training in many cities. Chicago is unique. There are not many cities that use people with lived experience to do the trainings. So then we do that all afternoon on Thursdays, and then Friday morning we all get together, and each group of officers goes twice. Um, Once in a room where there is no weapon, once in a room where the person in crisis has a weapon. On Fridays, we'll watch all the videos together, and the sergeant or lieutenant in charge of that week will talk about it from a tactical point of view if everyone was safe. My boss from NAMI will talk about it from a psychological point of view. Um, the officers will be asked how they felt about it. The person in crisis will discuss how it felt to them. Um, and we'll drink some coffee. And yeah, that's basically how it goes.
I think that this is a great story, really an inspiring story of someone taking a life experience and turning it into, that sounds like it probably was not good,
Yeah.
to say the least, and turn it into something that's really helpful to other people. That's fantastic. I don't think most people have that sort of experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was brought to the hospital the first time by my brother, the second time by a social worker who I knew, and the last time I was brought from an outpatient program back just upstairs to inpatient.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, like in Chicago alone, there are like 130, 140 mental health related 911 calls every day. So there are a lot of people in mental health crises, which are terrifying enough, being brought to the hospital by police. And it's already escalated enough simply because they are police, and we know that. And if there's anything that we can do to help train them better to make that already terrifying, confusing situation less terrifying and confusing, then I am so happy to be a part of that. And I mean, at the end of the Friday uh, debrief, we all get up there and say a bit of like a sentence or two about ourselves. And I always tell each group that I always tell them that I tell everybody I meet that this happens in our city and that there are people who they will hopefully never meet who are proud of them, right? Because yeah, they're doing something really important.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So how does your history with mental illness in your brain, the brain that you have, how does that influence and relate to your artwork?
Um, yeah, so I think I mentioned before that like for a good 10, 12 years, doing just abstract painting was a good escape. Like I used painting as an escape from thinking, and that really worked for me. Um, but then maybe 3.5 years ago, where I'd solidly been out of the hospital and felt fully well, for a good period, um, I I felt I felt like comfortable enough in my mind to start re-engaging with things that made me uncomfortable, um, with the news, with social issues that made me uncomfortable, things that I had kind of steered clear from while I was super depressed. Like I felt very fragile, um, and I felt a bit tougher, and I felt like I wanted to perhaps use my art as a vehicle of thought rather than an escape from it.
Okay.
So that is when I started making like basic photo collages. Um, and it was a friend actually who suggested maybe I combine my painting with the collages, and that was a big door opening. Um, but I think a big like the another big door opened when I was talking to a friend and we kind of figured out that we both like art, whether it's visual or film or whatever, that just makes us uncomfortable.
You
Um,
like art that makes
I
you
do like
uncomfortable.
it. I
Okay.
do. I didn't back when I was depressed, right? Because I felt sort of fragile and I steered clear of things that were uncomfortable. But now that I was feeling like good and stable and happy, like the art I think that I find the most interesting often is art that makes me a little bit uneasy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this was around the time that I was starting to do all this work with NAMI and getting very personal and talking about my personal experience and sharing very explicitly my history with depression and hospitalization and all this stuff. And I was kind of like, well, why am I not doing this in my artwork? And the first time I I made a piece that dealt that who I mean it's called dysmorphic, and it had to do with my personal experience of dealing with anorexia and disordered eating in high school. And it's difficult to look at, and it's not pretty. And I showed it somewhere, and I
Showed it at like a public space?
yeah, at a group show. And I remember when somebody came up to me and said, "I hate looking at this. I really like it." And that felt to me like a success, and it
Mhm.
felt like a validation of like this weird paradox where the more personal I have gone with my artwork, the more it has seemed to resonate with people. So ever since then, I've just been like leaning more and more personal. And, now I'm using text. So back to writing, I'm finally doing some writing again. And that's felt really scary, but I've been trying to lean into the experience. The new project is doing a narrative project, like a graphic novel of sorts. So that's feeling scary. But I'm trying to lean into topics that make me uncomfortable, images that make me uncomfortable because they're personal. So yeah, that has very much had to like been a simultaneous story with my mental health story.
Well, Frederick, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.